Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic original 62 book series, and it's book number 7, Night of the Living Dummy. Now, off the bat, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of intimidating, especially when we're dealing with the original, I guess the first 16 original 62 books, right? It gets intimidating to do some of these books, especially this one. Because, as we all know, the Night of the Living Dummy franchise birthed Slappy, and Slappy has the biggest franchise presence in all of Goosebumps. And he's, for better or for worse, the main mascot and has been for quite some time. So, by the point of this video, I've done a few Slappy books here and there, but I'm playing catch up and I'm currently reading through some early Slappy, right? And I started here. The book that saved Goosebumps from cancellation. In case you didn't know, the 6th book, Let's Get Invisible, there was talks about canceling the series after that. Well, they decided to push on, and Night of the Living Dummy came out, and it was so popular that word of mouth pretty much blew up Goosebumps to an astronomical level. So in a lot of ways, I think books like Night of the Living Dummy, mainly this book, I would say, is what we all owe for this series as a whole. I mean, without this book, I don't think the series would be the same, or maybe have never gone on to begin with. But that being said, though, as much as I love parts of this book, it is flawed, in my opinion. And I'm just going to put this out there. I know to a lot of you out there watching, especially if this is the first video of mine that you're watching of me, I am genuine about my opinions, right? I'm a fan at heart, and if I, say something about a book I don't like, I genuinely mean it. But when we're talking about these big, important books like Night of the Living Dummy, the big top 5 mainstream ones that everybody knows and talks about all the time, I don't want to come off like I have some sort of, grinder to pick with these books. I really don't. I'm a fan at heart. I go into these wanting to love them. And this book, when I was a kid, I loved this book in a lot of ways. And as an adult, I still love a lot about this book. But I have issues with it. And I just want you to know that before I get into the review portion near the end of the video. Just to be transparent, okay? So yeah, this book, off the bat, if you have not read Night of the Living Dummy, right? This book is a cornerstone in Goosebumps to try out. I mean, a lot of people probably would say the first 3 Night of the Living Dummy books are must-tries if you're like getting into the series, and after you read a few, then you should try these out. I will definitely echo that sentiment, but especially with the first book, because I think that if you don't like the first book, you might like the second book more. But if you don't like that book, you can try the 3rd book. And if you don't like that book, I don't know what else to tell you with the rest of these dummy books, but one of these are going to do it for you. And I know there's a good amount of you that think that this is the best dummy book ever made. I'm not knocking you. I don't personally think it, but I definitely recommend it, right? You need to try this book out, okay? So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, since this is an early Goosebumps book, and Stein does this from time to time, this is not just relegated to early Goosebumps, right? This story is told in 3rd person. And there's really 2 main characters here, but it's mainly told in the lens of one character. But these 2 characters are twin girls, and they're named Chris and Lindy. And they're 12 years old, and one day they're in their house, and they're playing, whatever they're playing with, and they're arguing about what's theirs and what's not. And you get this sense that these 2 girls argue all the time. Lindy is a girl who thinks that Chris is always getting the attention and always getting what she wants, and Lindy can never have anything of her own. And then Chris thinks that Lindy's full of herself and always seeking attention and trying to just jeopardize, everything that she likes. So they're both at odds with each other. And while they're arguing, their mother says, hey, why don't you girls go outside? It's a nice day outside. And the girls are like, we're old enough to go, to make our own decisions. We're not young. We don't have to go outside and play. But they take the advice anyway and they go outside. And across the street, there is a house being constructed. There is a very old, decrepit house that was said to have been torn down, and they have been building like the framework and the foundation for the house, and it's been coming up pretty quick. So the girls decide to go check it out. They go check out this house, and there's a few jump scares because they actually go inside of this house in construction, and they get jump scared by some squirrels and stuff. And upon leaving the house, they see a dumpster, presumably where they went through the old house and threw away a bunch of stuff that was inside of it. And Lindy goes inside of the dumpster and finds something cool, and she motions Chris over to the dumpster. And she pulls out a wooden ventriloquist dummy. And Lindy herself names this dummy Slappy. So from this point on, right, the only continuity that the dummy books have really ever maintained is Lindy's name for Slappy. I'm flabbergasted. Out of all the things to stick, Lindy's nickname for her dummy, Slappy, is what sticks. But I digress. So, Lindy names his dummy Slappy. He's a really creepy... You look at this cover. That's essentially how he's described in the book, just without green eyes. He has blue eyes, right? And it's a big old other rabbit hole to go into, but she is in love with this dummy immediately. And Chris is freaked out by it. Slappy looks weird. Lindy's already using him to make jokes. And Chris doesn't like it. And Lindy thinks that she's jealous that she was the one that found the dummy. And Chris is like, I'm not jealous. I don't care if you keep it. Trying to play it cool. But Lindy, when she takes the dummy back home, she starts practicing ventriloquism. And she gets pretty good at it. And that's pretty much all she starts to talk about. She gets consumed with it. Kind of like how kids do with various hobbies growing up. If you're a kid, you could probably go back and look at the laundry list of hobbies you tried. Like maybe sports, maybe you tried video games or whatever. But a ventriloquist hobby is kind of cool and interesting, right? And Chris immediately starts to feel kind of jealous, and openly jealous, and kind of lashing out at Lindy, right? And Lindy kind of deserves it because Lindy, I'm going to be upfront about Lindy and Chris, y'all. I haven't mentioned this yet, but they argue for a majority of this book, and it kind of gets in the way from enjoying their characters at times. But Lindy goes out of her way to rub it in Chris's nose that she found the dummy and it's hers. Well, Chris, she builds up this tension with Lindy and with Slappy, and she starts getting in her head that she can be a better ventriloquist than Lindy. She thinks that Lindy's not funny, and she would be way better. But she just needs her own dummy, because Lindy will never let her have the dummy or share the dummy, right? Well, one day, Lindy is trying to, practice her ventriloquism in front of her parents, and Chris gets upset, like visibly upset, over on the, over up to the side, and their parents notice, and when they come to confront Chris, she essentially blurts out, "I want my own dummy," And Lindy's like, "What'd you say? You just want to copy me. You're just always trying to steal my thunder." And Chris is like, "So what? I think it's cool. I want my own dummy." So the parents essentially try to tell Lindy to share the dummy with her, and Lindy just reluctantly allows her to mess around with Slappy. But you can tell that this is not going to work long term, and I think the parents understood that. So I'm kind of skipping a lot of stuff because there's a lot of banter and exposition that kind of don't matter in this first half here. But there comes to a point where one day, Chris is not expecting this. Her father brings home a dummy from a pawn shop. And this dummy has like a flannel shirt and has some jeans and looks kind of creepy, kind of like how Slappy looks. And Chris is just amazed that she has her own dummy, and she calls him Mr. Wood. Now, almost immediately after getting Mr. Wood, she starts practicing, and she has a couple of friends throughout this first half where she is entertaining, practicing in front of, and her friends don't really find her funny. And this kind of discourages Chris, while Lindy, while she's been practicing with Slappy, has got herself a gig to a birthday party, and she's going to make money off her ventriloquism. And when hearing that, Chris kind of makes up a lie to Lindy and says, "Oh well, you know, um, I made a bunch of people laugh. You should have been there." And Lindy's kind of poking holes in Chris's story, but kind of going along with it. And as the story goes on, Lindy performs at a birthday party, gets success, gets more birthday parties involved. People love her skit with Slappy. And Chris has yet to find her footing with Mr. Wood. And kind of off, this is a trend to these first couple of Goosebumps books. Off page of the story, she gets this gig, right, where she gets to perform in front of a bunch of parents at an auditorium with her music teacher. It happens completely off page, right? But while all this stuff is going on, Chris thinks that something is going on with Mr. Wood, her dummy. And there's a couple of hints dropped as soon as she gets Mr. Wood that something seems off with him. His eyes look like they're staring into her soul. She hears mysterious noises that can't be explained when the dummy's in the room with her. She wakes up and she sees that the dummy has his hands wrapped around Slappy's neck. There's a lot of things involved with that, right? And it comes to a point where one day she's at school and she wants to kind of do a rehearsal for the show. So she brings Mr. Wood to the show, backstage with her. And something happens there, and she thinks that Mr. Wood may or may not be alive, right? When she comes home later that day, there's another thing that happens with Mr. Wood, where she goes downstairs and has this really eerie encounter in the kitchen with Mr. Wood sitting in the middle of the kitchen, and there's stuff taken out of the fridge, sprawled all over the place. And she's mortified. And she thinks that Mr. Wood's alive. And, of course, it causes commotion. Lindy's there. Mom comes down. And the mom's like, look, this is ridiculous. This has gone too far. I want the both of you to give up your dummies. I want you both to give up ventriloquism. This is absolutely ridiculous. And the girls beg and plead, like, hey, we'll clean up this mess. It was, us. We'll fix it, right? And just please, if we clean it up, just let us keep our dummies. And the mom's like, okay, if you clean it up, you get to have the dummies for one last try. And if you mess this up, you're not going to be able to have them anymore. So the girls clean it up, and of course, Chris is allowed to go to her show the very next day. But there's a bombshell dropped to her, and this is around the halfway point of the book, from her sister Lindy. And Lindy may or may not have been behind pretty much every single event dealing with the dummies in the first half. And I really don't like that reveal. I think that middle reveal there just kind of takes away that entire first half of the book for me in a lot of ways. But once you get past that, it kind of soft resets around, like, right around over the halfway point a little bit. So, of course, Chris is messing around with Mr. Wood, making sure that he looks good, playing with his flannel, playing with his jeans. And she finds a note in its pocket. And she pulls out the note and reads the iconic phrase. Then, if you're a fan of the Night of the Living Dummy franchise, you know what the phrase is. And she reads it out loud. And after she reads it out loud, she could swear that Mr. Wood blinked. And she kind of freaks out a little bit, doesn't know what to think of it, but she has to get to school to do her show. So she brings Mr. Wood to the show, and Mr. Wood, now this was kind of hinted in the first half, but this stuff was kind of deleted. But now, since that everything has been revealed to Chris, this stuff is now for real happening with Mr. Wood, it appears. Mr. Wood can talk on his own, right? And this starts when she gets up on the stage to do her show. And this is an iconic scene in Goosebumps, right? Where she's on the stage with Mr. Wood, and her teacher's walking away, and Mr. Wood starts insulting her about her weight and stuff, making fun of her, embarrassing her. The teacher is demanding an apology, and Mr. Wood, you know, is sitting there blabbing away, and Chris is like, I'm not doing this to the dummy. It can't be me. And Mr. Wood projectile vomits all over the entire audience and grosses them out, right? And of course, Chris gets a big old scolding by her teacher, and the teacher's like, I'm going to ensure that you get suspended from school. Well, when Chris gets home, her parents are furious with her and locks Mr. Wood up in the closet. Says, Monday, we're taking this dummy back to the pawn shop. No more Mr. Wood for you, right? So Chris is like, okay, this is weird, but, you know, I still need to get to the bottom of this. I really need somebody to believe that I didn't do this. So she's trying to tell Lindy, and Lindy's like, come on, stop pulling my chain. You know, I got you beforehand, and you're just trying to copy me again. And Chris is like, no, I'm being dead serious. And Lindy still won't believe her, right? So Chris, she feels so ashamed, and she's losing sleep throughout the night. She can't seem to really click her mind off of what happened in the auditorium. Well, she hears something coming out of the closet where her parents locked up Mr. Wood. And this kicks on the climax of the book, right? And this, honestly, is one of the best climaxes in Goosebumps history, y'all. I'm being for real. So she hears these sounds coming from this closet, and she follows it, and notices that Mr. Wood is up and walking and is alive, essentially. And for the first time, we get to meet this living dummy. And Mr. Wood is pretty mean and nasty, and, you know, kind of threatening her, telling her to back off, right? And Chris goes to tackle him and tries to hold him down, and she's freaking out. She's like, oh, I gotta wake my parents up. If I can convince them that Mr. Wood's alive and did all of this, I can get out of this scot-free. Well, Mr. Wood is putting up a fight, and then he's threatening her. He says, you let me go, or, you know, your fate's going to be worse than you can imagine. Like, threatening her, saying that he has powers and stuff. Well, her commotion causes the attention of Lindy, who looks down the stairs. They're at the bottom of the stairwell, and she's wrestling the dummy. And Lindy kind of gets a glimpse that Mr. Wood may or may not be alive, right? And the girls are freaking out, and they're like, we need to wake up Mom and Dad. And they try to wake them up, and when they come and look down at the situation, Mr. Wood's limp. And then they go back to bed. So, once they go back to bed, Mr. Wood comes back to life, and essentially tells the girls, you know, you're my slaves. You have to do what I say. You have to do my bidding, right? And the girls are like, no, we need to find a way to kill this thing, right? And they get this idea because Mr. Wood reveals how he came to life. So they try this one thing dealing with the card that they found, and it doesn't work. And then they come to this conclusion to try to kill him. And they go to this description like, we got to cut his head off. Like, wow. That's in a Goosebumps book, y'all. This is early Goosebumps, mind you. Not too far away from Welcome to Dead House. And if you read that book, it makes sense that this stuff is in here. But they want to essentially kill this dummy because Mr. Wood kind of seals his own fate by saying, hey, look, you read the spell that activates me. You didn't read the spell that kills me. So they're like, oh, okay, kill you? Okay, we can do that. So they get this idea to kill him. But he seems stronger, right? He seems strong. He keeps putting up a fight, and the girls freak out, and they put him in this briefcase, and they get this idea. It's starting to kind of storm outside. They're like, look, there's a giant dirt mound over there. They're going to be doing construction there tomorrow. Let's go bury him in the dirt, and the bulldozers will take care of him tomorrow. So they take the briefcase out, and throughout the walk, Mr. Wood's like, you're going to regret this. You're going to regret this. Don't do this. Your fate's going to be worse. You better let me go now before it gets too late. The girls don't listen and take him to the dirt hill and bury him. Then the girls go back to bed, back in their house, and have try to get some sleep because, they were doing this out like 2, 3 a.m. Well, they wake up the next morning, and Chris is horrified when she comes downstairs and sees that Mr. Wood is downstairs. And the mom's freaking out, and there was a thing about the dummies being downstairs earlier that gets kind of paid off here. And the parents have to leave. Mom and Dad have to leave. They have to go do shopping before the storm comes. And the girls realize that they're going to be home alone with Mr. Wood, who they try to essentially bury alive the night before. And let's just say Mr. Wood does some violent things to the family dog Barky. I'm not going to tell you what he does, but if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And this is probably the most tense part of the whole book. You don't know what's going to happen, and maybe or maybe not, Chris and Lindy are able to save their dog, and maybe or maybe not, they're able to take control of the situation and escalate it outside. And something, let's just say something happens to the main characters in Mr. Wood, right? Now, after that happens, there's an ending twist that involves Slappy. And I'm going to be very vague about that and just end it there. Because if I go any further, I'm going to spoil the ending. But that's essentially Night of the Living Dummy, the original. So, let's start off with positives to this book, right? Positives to this book. I think that one of the greatest strengths about this book, right, is Prowse. You know, I sometimes bring this up with some Goosebumps books, but I think this is one of the best examples of Prowse done well in Goosebumps. The way Stein writes this book, it feels energetic. It feels like the character dynamics, even though the characters have their issues, the dynamics feel kind of, you know, fluid. And that's not uncommon in the series, but this book really stands out to me in how this setting and everything just pops with the characters, and the descriptions of things get kind of vivid sometimes. And while some things happen off page, the Prowse is really great, right? There's really effective tension building up in that first half. Even though that mid-book reveal kind of just squanders the whole first half, in my opinion, the tension building is some of the best tension building you will find in Goosebumps, in my opinion. And that even translates to the second half. I mean, when it kind of soft resets after that middle reveal, it pretty much resets and goes back to square one. And in my opinion, I think that the second half outdoes the first half tremendously. I mean, the second half is probably one of the best build-ups, climaxes, and endings, or at least most iconic in Goosebumps history. I mean, it's fantastic. Wow. And that kind of bleeds into where Stein was willing to go with the story, dealing with the villain, Mr. Wood. Now, I think Mr. Wood is a positive overall. If I only had one nitpick, I feel like it was kind of a misstep to go with Mr. Wood in this book. Going the whole Friday the 13th part 1 with going with like Pamela Voorhees instead of Jason. I can see why. There's sequel bait at the end. And there's like a name drop with there's a friend character in this book named Amy, and I'm wondering, and I could be wrong, and I probably am, because knowing Stein and continuity, it probably isn't the same Amy. But maybe the original intention that Stein had was to have sequel bait and have these like one of their friends inherit something, right? So I can see the sequel bait there. But going with Mr. Wood, I feel like for a one-and-done character, to my knowledge, there is another Mr. Wood that appeared in the most recent Slappy book. I don't know if it's the same one. I know there's a spelling difference, and I think that was done on purpose. But for a one-and-done villain, he was pretty good. I mean, he was scary in some ways. He had a dark side to him. Now, I think there's been way better dummy books from my personal experience dealing with like the scariness and threat levels. But he was fine. I mean, he did what he did well. He wasn't described as creepy as Slappy. Slappy's on the cover here. Mr. Wood looks like some goofy dude wearing a flannel and, you know, denim jeans. But he did some creepy things. And I'll give it that. And yeah, the concept to this story, I think, you know, works. Stein obviously took this inspiration from Twilight Zone. There was a iconic dummy segment on there, and throughout the 80s too. This came out in the early 90s. Tales from the Dark Side that showed monsters. They were all doing living doll stories, and so was Child's Play. I mean, this formula has been done many times in horror, and in a lot of ways, I can kind of view this as a slight negative, but I'm not going to count it against this because of nostalgia and, you know, admiration. But I will say that for it being the most prevalent thing in Goosebumps, this little doll coming to life stuff. The formula does kind of wear thin, and depending on how much you've read, if this was like your first dummy book, I don't think you would notice it. Or maybe if this was your first introduction to this genre here, or subgenre, the living dolls, living toys, stuff like that. But there's a lot of it. And you've seen a lot of it before. It doesn't really break the mold here. I think even the spell bit was done in the Twilight Zone bit. Kind of unoriginal in some ways, but it has heart. It has ingenuity. Or at least for kids' horror of its time. And like I said, this saved Goosebumps, so you have to give this book respect. And that's another positive I have. You know, nothing I'm going to actually, count points towards, but it saved Goosebumps, and I have a lot of respect and admiration for it. But my negatives, really, I really only have 3. And they're kind of medium ones, and they all are kind of even, in my opinion. The first half of the book, right, is completely squandered by that middle twist, and it makes it feel all for nothing. That tension building stuff. It literally felt like the first half of the book resets and goes into the second half with a brand new start. It's ridiculous, and I can see people being more forgiving on that, but I'm just not willing to be forgiving on that. I just hate that. And on top of that, right, the first half of the book, I think the characters get better in the second half. I think they kind of come together near the end, and they kind of get over their arguing and bickering. I think this whole ordeal has made them closer. And I'll count that as character development, right? But the first half of the book, right, these two girls are constantly fighting and bickering and just being really nasty and mean to each other. And Lindy is borderline hateable. And Lindy specifically is terrible. Chris, she lies and makes up stuff to her sister, and she tries to gloat, and she does provoke Lindy too. She's not completely innocent, and they both just come off kind of awful in the first half. I'm just not a fan of them. It makes it really hard to get into the book initially, each and every time that I've read this book. I just can't get into their characters ever. I mean, this is a book where you definitely love the other things about it than the main characters. And I guess my last negative with it is the fact that there's 2 dummies, right? And I think that Dummy 2 from memory kind of does this too. But I feel like the second dummy is, Slappy being the second dummy in the story, surprisingly. If you know Goosebumps, you know Slappy, right? Him being kind of the accent piece to the story, I don't know how well that kicks off the character, but the ending kind of saves that. I feel like there was wasted potential in that first half, right? I feel like Stein could have, the second half, when Chris reads the card, that could have been done way earlier and could have maybe involved both dummies. I'm not trying to say, what Stein should have done. I mean, he's the one that wrote this book, but I think I would have rather preferred that and seen more Slappy in this. But you did get a whole book after this dedicated to Slappy, so I guess that works, right? But it just feels like wasted potential in some areas. Not the biggest thing. Maybe just a slight notch below the Chris and Lindy issue in the first half and that halfway point issue I have. But yeah. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, right? I'm just gonna be honest, y'all. I really want to give this book a score, and a good score. The problem is like, I don't know if I can rate this book fairly. Because if I'm being honest, if I didn't have nostalgia for this book and I don't have like the actual respect I do for this book, this would probably be a C tier book. Straight up. But because I have nostalgia for it, I want to put it higher. So I'm giving it bonus points and I'm going to put it in the B tier. Now, this might be insulting to a couple of you, but I think this is perfectly fair for this book, right? It's the first in the series. I think it had a couple of kinks in the chain, compared to the first couple of books in the series, with a couple of things happening off page. It's not the biggest issues there involving that. That's why I don't mention them in negatives. But there's stuff like that, and then you have like the halfway point reveal that just kind of takes away the first half, and I feel like the tension building just kind of hits a brick wall and then resets. I think it's been done better in sequel books after. And that's kind of unfair to say when I'm just reviewing a book on an individual basis, but knowing what comes later, I think really does affect your opinion on this first book here. And that might not for some, but I just think that other books do it better. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'm giving this a B, but to be fair, it has issues, medium ones. So I'm giving this a flat 4 out of 5 stars. That's still a really great recommendation score for me. Like a 3 out of 5 is like a D to me. A 4 out of 5 is a B minus. But this is a good book for what it is. I really enjoy this book. I love a lot about it. I dislike a decent part about it, but it balances out. It's a must read for the series. You got to try this out. Seriously. You can find this one easily at bookstores today. Go pick this up. So that's my thoughts about Night of the Living Dummy. Let me know down in the comment section. Do you love this book? Do you hate this book? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.